Circle in New Zealand. I would like to acknowledge the original custodians of Australia and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and hopes of Indigenous Australia. Kia ora everyone, it is my pleasure on behalf of the Circle and Pegasystems to warmly welcome everyone, including our guests of honour, Riccardo Pasto, Senior Analyst at Forrester, and Glenn Wealands, Head of Client Experience at Rabobank. Thank you both for your time to be here with us today and share your perspectives with us. I would like to especially thank our partner, Pegasystems, for bringing this conversation to us today. To Mike Knaggs, Customer Service Business Lead, and Denise Lai, Client Success Manager, who will be moderating today's session, it is a delight to work with both of you as well as your colleagues. Please note that we're on the record today and media may be present. The session will also be recorded. I'll now pass over to Mike to formally introduce our guests of honour. Thank you, Mike.
Hi, and thank you for joining our webinar today. I'm Mike Knaggs and I'll be kicking off and closing today's session titled The Future of Customer Service is Human and Digital at the Same Time. Quick introduction and background for myself. I'm a solution business lead for Pega and my role is really focused on helping our customers use our capabilities to better serve their customers. You know, it's quite broad. There are quite a few things our platform can do and there are also quite a few use cases where it's applicable, but it primarily fits within the customer service domain, which is the reason for my interest and involvement in today's event. Now, I've worked in the customer service technology space almost my whole professional career. You know, I started in the contact center vendor world. I then moved into the CRM world. And I kind of thought these two areas were really, primarily focused on just the engagement phase of customer service. You know, it's about, allowing me as a customer to, contact an organization via my channel of choice. It's about allowing that organization to see information about me, maybe giving them the single view of the customer. But when I think about customer service these days, it's really become so much more complex than that. You know, if I've contacted an organization for a reason, which could be quite complex, I ultimately care about how you can help me or deliver me a service, not just how I engage with you. I'm engaging with you only because I need an outcome. Now, if I think about what brought me to Pega is that, in addition to providing, capabilities that, address the engagement phase of customer service, there are two things that Pega does really well. One is to streamline and automate complex business processes, and the other is to make intelligent real-time decisions. And I generally explain that as, providing action and intelligence, not just engagement. Now, if we look at what we're seeing with COVID and also other critical or emergency situations is, a big increase in customer contact volumes, a big increase in complexity of customer contact inquiries, either because of new processes or changes in existing process, a lot more digital. Customers now aren't going into stores or branches and have had to do more online or over the phone. And you combine that with the fact that, customers can really be now sometimes in quite vulnerable situations, either with fear, uncertainty, financial pressure. So that personal element is now so much more important. So all this has really accelerated digital transformation for many organizations as they adapt to these new and complex demands. Now, if I think about why what Pega does is really kind of so unique and so important for this new world we've all experienced, is that we help organizations simplify that complexity. Make it easier for your customers to get outcomes and make it easy for your staff to help your customers get those outcomes. We help streamline and automate those processes so you can spend more time focused on your customers and not your administration. And then also use artificial intelligence to help guide your interactions so they are more personal, more empathetic, and you're not just focused on either, inquiring about a bill or pushing a product when you might have customers that are in kind of moments of need. So simply, it's really about making it easy for your customers and personalizing with empathy your interactions with them. So now, having said that, we're going to hear today from two key speakers who are both more knowledgeable than I am in this domain and provide a wealth of real life in the field customer experience wisdom. Riccardo Pasto, Principal Analyst Customer Experience from Forrester, and Glenn Wealands, Head of Client Experience, Rabobank, Australia, New Zealand. Firstly, we'll start with Riccardo giving us a presentation on customer experience trends in a COVID world. And we'll then have Denise Lai, our Pega Client Success Manager, moderate a fireside chat with Riccardo and Glenn, going into more detail on these trends and real life examples. So with that, I'll now hand over to Riccardo to give us an expert analyst's view on customer experience. Riccardo, over to you.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it, and great to be here with you today. Hi, everyone listening to us and joining us for this session today. Well, I want to start the conversation today really acknowledging how much change and disruption we all went through over the past 18 months or so. At a personal level, sure, of course, for me, it's been quite a roller coaster ride. And as you imagine, for most of us, but also for organizations, every organization out there, dealing with vulnerability, really, requiring all organizations to put up defensive armors, right? But also taking advantage of opportunities, right? Because you see, obviously, disruption is not always a bad thing, right? It is actually breeding ground for opportunities. In fact, organizations, we know that organizations who are able to detect turbulence and chaos and take corrective action, quick actions in advance, they usually end up, even better off after the immediate crisis. Now, we also know that CX, customer experience, is really crucial in times of rapid change and radical change. In fact, the health crisis, for the better or worse, has accelerated digital and customer experience transformations for many firms, really being the greatest catalyst for transformation in recent memory, right? Now, I want to give you a very quick snapshot. So this is from last year, so 2020 Forrester CX index data from different regions. So this is a snapshot specific to FSI, looking at Australia, Singapore, India, and really telling us, how many organizations really, they responded well to the pandemic, right, to the health crisis. The problem is that most of them still just deliver okay experiences, right? There is very little differentiation, right? You see that delta between the lowest scoring brand and the highest scoring one. It's not that, that big, right? That tells us that, many brands really, fail to compete and differentiate themselves with customer experience. Now, the reason, what's the reason why organizations really struggle to improve CX just beyond keeping pace of customer expectations? Well, first and foremost, the main reason, really, from my perspective, from Forrester's perspective, is that customer experience requires organizations to have a much broader view, an holistic view of the entire ecosystem that they operate in, right? We know that the quality of any customer journey really, by the end of the day, depends on this complex ecosystem of interlocking parts, right? Everything must work together. Otherwise, ultimately, it will fail the customer. The COVID, the health crisis, the COVID-19 crisis really has been a huge stress test of our ecosystem, right? Think about, spikes in contact center volumes at the same time, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. How many contact centers had to shut down because of health problems, health issues, right? More recently this year, we've seen, at least here in Australia, some banks having problems with their mobile apps and websites because of third-party providers, cloud providers, having outages, right? And so you see, problems that happen, upstream or downstream across the entire value chain do have a tangible impact by the end of the day on the quality of customer experience that you deliver. Now, the problem is also that organizations have a very, opposite of what I said, have a very narrow view of customer experience. And usually that is a channel-centric view of CX. I often use this story to depict this problem. The Grimm brothers, famous in storytale, Hansel and Gretel, right? So you have the two kids, they go into this forest and they get lost, right? They used actually breadcrumbs to mark their way home, but then animals quickly ate all the breadcrumbs, and the two poor kids are actually lost in the wilderness, right? And I think this is a perfect example of customers who actually hop across many touch points and channels and interact with different organizations and they experience in a very similar way a disjointed journey, right? So basically all of the breadcrumbs that they leave as they interact with organizations, they're basically lost, right? And all of this basically puts them on an endless journey forward, but it is a journey that has no clear history of what happened in the past. But even more importantly, it's a journey that is full of roadblocks, and roadblocks that prevent or delay at least them to achieve certain goals, right? And I recently went through such a journey myself. Actually, I need to update this slide because I was able to complete it a few months ago, luckily. But just to illustrate how a customer journey can be really complex, right? And oftentimes it's out of reach purely within the walls of one organization, right? And oftentimes the problem is forcing customers. So the keyword here is forcing, right? This is not a choice, but forcing customers to hop across multiple channels, different touch points, both physical and digital. Now, how do we actually get better, right? So that should be the question, right? The $1 million question. How do we actually get better with CX? For starters, my first suggestion is, for a moment there, just forget for a second channels, right? Rather than channels, you need to think about the elements, all of the elements that make up for a great customer experience, right? And figure out which ones are the most important ones, right? For you, in order, you pull these levers and basically for you to move the needle of CX. Now, again, this is a visual representation of our data throughout many years of research at Forrester. We know that for most organizations out there, it's not always the case. It really varies, but on average, customer service type of drivers, right? They are usually the most important ones in order to move the needle of CX. Now, the second thing is you need to really understand how customers really want to interact with you, right? Before I mentioned about my journey, right? The vaccination journey, but really understand, how they would love to interact with you, right? What are their preferences, right? And, again, this is on average. Obviously, that will vary from, different, customer archetypes that you might have. But as it turns out, on average, that really depends on the complexity of the goals that they are trying to achieve, right? So simple goals like, tracking, a shipment, for example, account management, right? Most customers are quite happy to use self-service, digital self-service. Think about, chatbot or whatever tool online to do that, right? What it is labeled here in light green as automated channels. What about then, complex goals, like maybe, purchase recommendations that are tailored to individual needs or dispute resolutions or, customer complaints and this sort of stuff. Well, turns out that most customers still today prefer to interact with a human representative, right? Either on the phone or in person, but also what is labeled here as assisted, service, right? What you see there in dark green, which basically means, very simple use case of this. If you think about a customer service rep taking over the conversation from an automated bot, right? While retaining all of the same context of the conversation, right? So that the customer obviously does not to repeat, herself or himself, right? And the CSR, the customer service rep, can just jump right into the conversation and start to deliver value from the get-go, right? Obviously, technology here is truly important. This technology is the great enabler of customer experience. And here lies another big problem with technology. The way that organizations spend on technology, right? What they are trying to do with that, especially when it comes to automation, right? With the goal, basically, they're striving to take humans away, humans out of the service loop, right? And that oftentimes ends up in damaging CX rather than improving CX. Two big problems here. Number one, organizations who try to build no exit chatbots, for example, and so service tools. And even worse, the second one, they actually, actively try to hide, human representatives behind this maze, behind this, obstacle course, make it very easy, very difficult for them to, connect with a human representative. I'm telling you all of this because, I keep going back to, our data, our research, our studies. We know that this is really unfortunate, right? Our research actually shows that, again, on average, customer service, as I said before, customer service drivers are on average the most important ones. And amongst the top 3 of customer service drivers, 2 of these drivers, what you see there in dark green, they actually require a human representative. So CSRs answer all of customer questions. CSRs have the authority to solve problems without a supervisor. I want to give you an example from my latest research, which will be published in a week or so. So the updated CX index for Australia, for banking specifically. So this is NAB, and one of the initiatives that they decided to implement over the past few months, basically looking at how do we translate that in-person human experience in a digital way, right? And so this is quite simply what they've done is to envision this booking system for home loan customers, and help them to book either a visit or actually a video call with advisors, financial advisors from NAB, and therefore making it much easier for customers to solve obviously quite a complex problem, which is the home purchase journey. Usually it's quite complex journey, but also to my point before, not only making it easier, but more emotionally appealing for customers. And we know that emotion is actually one of the the biggest drivers of customer experience quality, right? The emotional angle is really important. Now, given the importance of the human element of customer experience, it is only really logical for organizations to enable their employees, especially customer-facing employees, to deliver great CX with the right tools and the right support and the right training, right? That they actually need in order to perform their jobs. We know today many CX professionals they use customer journey maps, right, as a way to visualize customer experience and to find or pinpoint areas of improvement. So a suggestion here is to layer over the employee journey as well, and see how the customer journey and the employee journey are intertwined. Not only that, but what we found, what I found, with many of my clients is that oftentimes, when they see a dip in the customer journey, there is a mirroring dip in the employee journey, right? Maybe the employee doesn't have the right tools. Maybe they're trying to navigate multiple systems in order to serve the customer, and therefore causes frustration, obviously for the customer, but also the poor customer service rep is frustrated herself or himself, and therefore that dip in the employee experience. So I wanted to deep dive a little bit more into the technology angle and talk about a little bit of the technology stack and different stages that usually organizations go through when they try to implement, overhaul and implement new technology stack across the organization. So the starting point for virtually every organization is sort of the old school foundational systems. CRM, knowledge base, that sort of stuff. For decades now, most organizations luckily are equipped with those, so no issues there. But eventually, moving up to this, to this sort of pyramid here, and moving to efficiency tools. Efficiency tools that I touched upon before, mainly automation or RPA, unified desktop. And all of this stuff is really to take away much of the repetitive tasks and the painful tasks that employees need to perform every day, right? And therefore those tasks are better managed by technology. The third phase that you see there, and here, today, many organizations are tackling this, the effectiveness tools. So I'm talking about agent-facing, a bot, for example. So think about a chat bot that instead of being customer-facing is internally-facing, right? So, helps employees, customer-facing employees to quickly search for content in a knowledge base, for example. But also, agent collaboration tools. Basically, I'm talking about the ability to route certain conversations or certain emails or whatever to the best fit agent, right? Instead of saying, oh, hold on the line, I'll transfer you to somebody else. That that is preemptive, right? In finding the best fit agent. And the last phase, really important, and here again, several organizations are making huge investments here in prescriptive tools. So I'm talking about next best action, behavioral guidance, customer analytics, that sort of stuff. So these sort of tools really make it possible for organizations to move from sort of the reactionary customer service to sort of that preemptive service, right? And determine what, for example, would prevent a customer from complaining, right? So instead of going through the complaint journey, we just avoid that journey altogether because we know what to do, right, in advance. Again, I want to give you an example. Again, I'll go back to a NAB that I used before. I think NAB is a good example, a good illustration of this. What it really takes for an organization to undergo a very ambitious, multi-year transformation journey, a complete revamp of technology, what they call universal workflow. And really, some of the things that they've been doing that relates to the 4 steps that I mentioned before. So, for example, deploying natural language processing technology to read, to analyze customer emails and route those emails to the right person, right? So again, a massive undertaking from NAB that the whole goal here is obviously not only to improve the customer experience, but also the employee experience. At the same time, they've been, recording a lot of, efficiency gains when it comes to making, for example, employees more accountable for certain actions. Now, since we are talking about, massive multi-year journeys, massive investments, what we know is, how do we actually drive all of this when there are usually multiple stakeholders who are responsible to driving those actions, to drive CX and digital transformation? Now, in fact, what we know is, my background, as I said before, is customer experience. So I deal obviously a lot with customer experience professionals. What we know is that the #1 barrier when it comes to customer experience transformation is actually not lack of budget, not lack of certain resources like tools or whatnot. It is actually lack of collaboration, right? So how do we actually make sure that a CIO or a CTO, whoever is in charge of technology, is actually collaborating effectively with a CMO or Chief Customer Officer, if you have one in your organization, to make the right decisions when it comes to the right technology? I want to wrap up this initial conversation with me with 2 recommendations. So how do we actually drive this collaboration? Now, the first one is a little bit more strategic, a little bit more ambitious, if you will. So if you are a senior leader, right, who can actually, tangibly, influence, the strategic direction of your organization, well, what you need to do is, first and foremost, embed and formalize and embed CX into the overarching corporate strategy, but also, make sure that you link your specific customer experience initiatives with meaningful and measurable KPIs. Now, in this example here is Westpac. So went to analyze their, the latest, annual report, and I thought they've done a really good job at telling this story, right? Outlining three core pillars of the strategy. So the first one there is about, fixing things, fixing problems. And therefore, what does it mean for us? How do we actually do that? Well, we need to, improve customer remediation. We need to reduce IT complexity and so on and so forth. The second, the central piece that you see there, is actually telling the story of how they've improved over the past 2, 3, 5 years, complaints management, right? Not only that, but linking all of this with, senior leader KPIs. In this case, compensation and remuneration of, directors. So there are, specific KPIs when it comes to, complaints resolution, right? And so this is a really, tells a compelling story, right? That the organization is actually serious about this. In this case, just an example is about complaint management, right? And the second example is related to this, but I guess it's a little bit more tactical and probably easier to implement. As a first step. My recommendation is don't look at KPIs as don't frame them as output-based KPIs. Rather than what you need to do is to frame them as outcomes-based KPIs. So, for example, how many times we hear organizations, oh, we have to release a new mobile app by the end of the month, right? So this is our goal. Well, the goal shouldn't be that, right? The goal should be something else. Maybe it's about improving mobile app reliability. Maybe it's about boosting customer retention, right? So those are the things that really matter for the organization, not that you release a new app every 2 weeks or every month or whatever. Another example is how many organizations say, "Oh, we need to deploy a chatbot." Why? Nobody really knows, right? That shouldn't be the KPI. Developing a new chatbot. The KPI should be, as an example, reducing the time to answer customer questions, while also improving the customer experience, right? So, these sort of, KPIs can help you shift the conversation, right? And shift the attention and the type of work that different stakeholders perform across the organization. So really, again, my last piece of advice here, what you measure is actually what you get, right? And with that, I'll wrap it up, and thank you all. And we can move on. I think, Denise, please feel free to jump in.
Thank you, Riccardo. Really enjoyed your presentation there. It's very informative and interesting. As Client Success Manager of Pegasystems, I have the pleasure of being the moderator for today's fireside chat. And thank you, Riccardo, for also joining us for this chat. And next, I would like to introduce Glenn Wealands from Rabobank. Glenn, would you mind introducing yourself, your role, and tell us a little bit about about Rabobank and your customers?
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks, Denise, for having me. And yeah, hopefully this time next year we'll be able to do this in a more face-to-face environment rather than virtually, which would be fantastic. And thanks also, Riccardo, for that presentation. So it's always really quite inspiring. And I think I've seen you a number of times now, and every time I learn a little bit extra. So thank you for that. My contribution today is to give a little bit of a Rabobank perspective. So Rabobank, for those that don't know, is a Dutch financial services organisation. It's been around for 120 years or thereabouts, and it's really focused in on its reason for being is being a bank for farmers, by farmers, a bank for communities, by communities. So the essence of what we're about is to really build out and say our purpose is to be able to be fundamentally customer centric. So outside of the Netherlands business, Rabobank has a number of key markets in which it operates, of which Australia and New Zealand are two very key markets for the business globally. Its focus really is from there around being able to be a leader in terms of providing agricultural finance and also advice and guidance and support into that particular market. So how do I fit into that? So my role is head of client experience within Australia and New Zealand. And in many ways, I think my role is absolutely critical based on what I just talked about. So the 120 years history, really putting the customer front and center at everything we do. So in many ways, I'm standing on the shoulders of those that have gone before me to continue to champion the best of the needs of our customers. And certainly, it's not something that, as I've heard before, customer experience is definitely not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It's really a journey that never ends. So I'm mindful of that we need to continue to align to our customer needs. Their expectations every year just become higher and higher, and it's really a matter for us to respond. So within that context, my role within the bank is to champion the voice of the customer, not only to share the good news in terms of our performance, but also what's really key is also to shine the light on the other perspective as well, and that includes customer complaints. So even though the aspiration obviously is to do the best that we can, from time to time complaints do occur. So it's really important that the executive, the board, and the business get a balanced view of our client experience. So where are we working well, what's the strengths and what's the opportunities to improve, and really driving those actions through the business across our core divisions, which is a wholesale banking division. Core focus within Australia and New Zealand is around that supporting farmers. And we've also got an online savings business, which is effectively to originate funds for the benefit of packaging those up into loans for our lending business. So that's our business model in a nutshell.
Thank you, Glenn. And it sounds like you put the customer as key within your organisation, and you've recognised their importance within your organisation. So it's great to hear. Can you tell me, I guess, a little bit about how you've leveraged Pega to better serve your customers and what benefits you've seen for your customers?
Yeah, and I thought it was really nice. So it's totally unscripted, but a beautiful segue from what Riccardo was just talking about in terms of legacy. And so banks, in terms of their technology and systems, are really have moved a long way, I think, in a relatively short time, to move from basic capture of information to much more automated and integratable workflow situations. So we're certainly using Pega as the architecture in terms of workflow within the business within Rabobank. But what I've been particularly proud of is the way that we've been able to leverage Pega for the benefit of being able to drive and focus our complaints management framework. So it's very much moving from an old Excel-based solution, if you like, to something that's actually very much in line with the aspirations of the regulator, to be much more integrated, aligned to their reporting requirements, and much more importantly, focusing on the risk controls for the business as well. So rather than have manual controls from the business, wherever we can automate them and create push notifications, that can only be a good thing in terms of improving customer experience.
That's great. And I know that COVID has, obviously had a big impact to customers and organisations, especially over the last almost 2 years. Tell us, what's that meant for your organisation, and how has that accelerated and impacted your digital transformation?
Yeah, it's been a fascinating time. Maybe that's not the right word to use, fascinating, but it's I'm sure people look back in generations to come and say, what great case studies COVID-19 has brought to the world of business in large. So you could tell by my introduction that our fundamental business model is a relationship model. So our reasons for being, whether it's with our focus within food and agriculture within wholesale, or whether it's within our rural banking business, the essence of what we're about is the ability to be able to have those face-to-face valuating conversations. And so whether it's conversations at the board table with our executives within our wholesale business, or the conversations at the kitchen table with our farming customers, that's been the key relationship leverage point, to be able to package up the knowledge, the networks, the information that Rabo has globally, and align it to the needs and aspirations of our customers. So for us to be able to move from effectively that model, which has been a key differentiator for the business over a very long period of time, and say, how do we pivot in 2020 almost overnight to be able to continue to have that great flow of knowledge, networks, and information into our customer base and add value? So for us, it's meant really, I think, great recognition for our IT departments for their ability to enable our staff to be able to have the tools and information and connections to be able to continue to interact digitally. But at the same time, despite all that change, our aspiration, what we need to do is fundamentally the same, is continuing to create those face-to-face conversations, more often than not now in a digital environment for the moment, but to be able to continue to be able to support our key clients in the achievement of their business goals. And that's obviously been really important, that we've been able to refocus our efforts. In terms of the earlier part of your question, how's that changed our digital transformation? In some ways, not really. It's been something that the aspiration for us has been fundamentally, if you think about the pillars of client experience, not only do we need to be effective in terms of adding value, creating the emotional connections and the empathy and support that goes with a deep understanding of our clients' needs, but it's also that easy to do business with. So in some ways, digital has been the key element that we've all been aspiring to. And so a digital roadmap has actually been in place for quite some time. All it's done for us, I think, is to be able to particularly highlight the fact that we need to continue to invest. And I think I really like the chart that Riccardo showed, which is the maze of journeys that people can go through when they've got a particular issue. It should be seamless and straightforward. So the aspiration, if anything, of the digital roadmap for us is continue to really drive that ease of doing business with it and making it simple for our customers. So with our farmers, for example, fantastic, innovative farmers, let's let them get on with being fantastic, innovative farmers, and we'll look after the banking and the technology to support them behind that. And that's really the key philosophy for us.
That's great. And Riccardo, I'm interested to understand, I guess, from your perspective, no doubt you must be consulting with many organisations on a way that they can drive better customer engagements in a post-COVID world. What are you seeing happening in the industry now?
Sure, I'll touch upon some of the themes that I went through before. Really, first and foremost, and again, to echo Glenn as well, what we know, many organizations, the shift in demand toward digital, this is, undisputed, right? At the same time, we also know that, customers still attach that, highly emotional value to humans, right? To human customer experience. Now, with that, obviously, that will vary depending on the, the competitive advantage of different organizations where, you strive to be the best at, whether that is customer intimacy, that might, sounds the case of Rabobank, right? That relationship. So obviously for them, for you, Glenn, from what I'm hearing from you, really, really crucial. Whether that is, operational excellence, obviously here automation, might be more important, right? How do we actually, save on cost to serve customers? Last but not least, whether your competitive advantage is really that product innovation. By product here, I mean, obviously, physical products as well as, services. So depending where your priorities lie, CX has a different, role to play, I guess. The second biggest thing that I've seen across the whole, health crisis, the employee experience. Before I touch briefly about the employee experience, as specifically about the enablement component, but there is so much more to the employee experience. Think about, burnout issues, employee, well-being, both financial and, mental, well-being. These are serious issues that many organizations have been focusing on, likely, very, very strongly. The third one, the ecosystem. I'll keep, mentioning this. We have a prediction for next year, Forrester. So one of the customer experience predictions is really about that ecosystem and how, from my point of view, really, we're talking about, collaboration of CX professionals with, the CIO or, the CMO or, whoever else across the organization. The COO is going to be also very important. So the chief or operational officers. how do we actually better work with them to make sure that the ecosystem and all the operations are in place in order to support the customer experience. And last but not least, the fourth one that I want to mention here, we've seen a spike in values-based consumers during the health crisis. The way that we define, obviously, values-based consumers, varies dramatically depending on what kind of values we're talking about, whether it is moral or ethical values, the sustainability, the green economy and that sort of stuff, but also supporting the local community. And I've done at the beginning of the year some research into this specific to Australia, and it turns out that supporting local community is one of the top priorities of values-based consumers here in Australia. So something to keep in mind there when it comes to thinking about initiatives, customer experience initiatives that at the same time support the local community. Really beneficial.
And Riccardo, I think that was a really nice link into the other somewhat overlooked element, which is really key in driving value as well, which is the employee experience or the cultural impacts as well. So if I can draw on our own experiences of that, is firstly, certainly making the point that a culture within an organization is one of those few sustainable strategic pillars of difference that we have. It's not something that can be re-engineered or reshaped or differentiated overnight. So the cultural element is super important within this mix as well, to say, how do we enable our staff to be able to be more engaged and more, and again, two sides of the same coin, if you like, but how can we enable them to be easier so that they can execute their business? And I think the other point, which is really important, is that within the changes that we've seen over the past 2 years, is firstly, number one, the importance of culture rising to the surface. That's been exacerbated by our work from home environment. So how do we connect in a meaningful way to all of our peers within the organization and get that strong sense of who our customers are? But there's also been that subtle shifts, which are some of those broader macro trends that we're seeing in the marketplace. So particularly within our Australian and New Zealand markets, for example, that trend towards nationalism has been really important. So the focus in on, I trust those organizations which are supporting in country has been important. So in some ways, an extension of some of the things that Riccardo was talking about of in community, just laddered up a level. And the other element, which I think has come to the fore in the last couple of years as well, exacerbated by the large amount of uncertainty of the world, is that theme of trust. So when we're pulling up our data, we're seeing that increasingly the organizations that succeed and make a difference in terms of longevity with their customer relationships have got these key pillars of trust peppered throughout the business, so that customers say, I know what I'm signing up for. I trust the organization, they understand me and they're supporting my needs. So therefore they're a brand for me. So I think those trends are really important. So Riccardo, thanks for the observations of bringing that to the fore as well.
Since you mentioned trust, I'm curious to understand a little bit better how strategically important it is for Rabobank, and also if that's the case, how do you actually measure that? How do you make sense of it?
Yeah, and I think it's fundamentally trust is not just something. If I put my being a member of the financial services industry hat on, trust is not something that's just limited to the organization, but there's fundamentally the long-term stability and trust of financial service organizations, I guess not even in Australia, but also New Zealand, around the world, whatever it may be, is the cornerstone of commerce, if you like, in many ways. So trust is absolutely important. I think in this part of the world, we've also had great guidance from regulators who I think quite rightly have talked about how do they protect clients in the environment that we've been in the past 2 years, particularly around vulnerable clients. And so they've been much more prescriptive in the requirements of banks to create trust, not only for the industry, but for their own customers as well. So that's certainly been first and foremost a really important thing. For us, we've got, it's naturally a core pillar of the business, and it's really an anchor. To underline what does that mean like from a metrics point of view, There's a whole host of metrics that we focus on within the business, but Net Promoter Score is obviously a guiding light for many of us. And we've been able to pull apart the analysis and say, what difference does high levels of trust, moderate levels of trust, or low levels of trust have in not only current advocacy, but importantly, as an indicator of the business going forward. So to what intention are clients likely to invest more with us, stay with us, advocate us to peers? There's a beautiful correlation all the way through in terms of those foundations of trust.
That's great. And Glenn, I guess you mentioned some of those metrics. Are there any others that you use for things like customer experience, growth, and productivity?
Yeah, fantastic question, because I think there is obviously different individuals championing different metrics, but I think the important thing is that you need to have different metrics in your toolkit. A, depending on what you're looking to measure, and secondly, in accordance with who the audience is. And I think that's one of the key things that, again, businesses that do it well, and I think for me, the effective trend is that not only, as I've just demonstrated, Net Promoter Score is great in terms of relationship strength. Customer sat metrics or customer effort score metrics are great at depicting specific customer journeys. But in order to enact change, one of the important things is to be able to have strong conversations at the executive table, at the board table. And to be able to do that, we need to be able to have those conversations where customer improvement benefits are articulated in terms of return on investment. So if we improve these things, this will generate positive income. Or if we, to use the graphic that's still sitting in my mind with Riccardo, if we can take some of the steps out of that maze of customer experience and make it simpler, it may be a cost benefit. It may drive more efficiency. It may drive fewer calls within the call center, but at the same time, much more satisfied customers, because, as I said before, our farming customers in particular are fantastic at farmers. Let's let them get on it being great farming. Let's not challenge them to navigate their way through our systems and processes to get an outcome. So speaking the language of the audience is super important. And of course, in this environment where I think cost management or return on investment has never been more important, to be able to articulate the benefits according to ROI is another key tool in the metrics pack that we need to be aware of.
I love how you frame this problem/opportunity here, Glenn, and I want to echo you when it comes to how do we build an effective measurement framework. And you said it yourself, metrics that need to be relevant for different stakeholders. So, meaningful. So not only measurable, right? We can measure it, sure, but do really, stakeholders care about those metrics or not? So that would be the meaningful part. The third thing that I think oftentimes is, overlooked is the linkage between amongst different types of metrics in order to tell that story that I was describing before with my example. How do we understand what really happened? So the objective truth, if you will, with operational data. How does the customer feel about that objective truth? That becomes their own subjective word, right? That would be the core customer experience metrics. You mentioned about, customer effort score, satisfaction, that sort of stuff. The third type of metric that we need to, link together is the outcome metrics. So the likelihood, for example, of, certain behavior from customers, or, even better, actual behavior, right? For example, NPS is one of those, outcome metrics. Maybe other things like, retention, keeping, our customers. Not only that, but also enriching the relationship that we have with them. That might be another good, outcome-based type of metric. So linking those in order to support. Okay, so what's the, the final, effect on, the top tier, business metrics that really care about, whether that is, customer lifetime value or revenue growth or whatever else. This is the only way really to tell that story. Again, not relying on just one or two metrics, but making different types of metrics, work together to tell that story.
Yeah, and I love that phrase as well of you get what you measure at the end of the day. So if you're only focused on one particular metric, well, guess what? You'll drive success on that particular element. And I think echoing that point within Rabobank, our simple little internal catch cry, if you like, in this order is it good for the customer? Is it good for the employee? Is it good for the bank? And being able to firstly have that compass running through the business in our key projects is super important. But it's also saying underneath that, are we measuring the right things to be able to assess, is it good for the customer? Is it good for our employees? And is it good for the bank? And that hybrid of metrics is actually really helpful in being able to give a balanced view on our performance across all those key elements.
So let me pivot just a little bit. I know we feel that I feel that we've come a long way for service agents, and I'm just really keen to hear your thoughts, Glenn, on what you think the role of technology has played for employee engagement.
Yeah, and I think it's, as I said before, it's really two sides to the same coin. So just as it's super clear from our clients that the bar continues to be raised in terms of continue to add greater value for me year on year. However, also make it easier for me to interact with you. 100% the same in terms of the employee engagement side of things. So one of the key philosophies is that definitely within the business, what we want to achieve is so that our employees can have their best day more often. So what that translates through to is how can we give better support, tools, accessibility to information, so that our clients and our staff can do what they want to do to have the most meaningful interactions during their day. So technology has been really important across so many different dimensions to do that. So firstly, as I talked about, technology to be able to continue the boardroom conversation, technology to be able to facilitate the kitchen table conversation with our farmers who often may be 300, 400, 500 kilometers away from a capital city, has been incredibly important. The focus on being able to be digital for the tasks on a transactional base, but be personal when it matters most, has also been critical in our philosophy. So the tools that we've been able to do to be able to, I think, pivot, again, is credit to the team to be able to move from a business as usual environment in February 2020 to something that looked very different by April 2020. And so the digitization of being able to keep the essence of what Rabobank's all about, but translate it into a virtual face-to-face environment has absolutely been key. And so as we've done that with our clients, we've also done a reasonable job of doing that internally and connecting our employees still as well.
Great. And Riccardo, just what are your thoughts, just lastly, what are your thoughts on the emerging generation of consumers? You know, what can you expect from these digital native consumers, and how can we future-proof them better?
Yeah, listen, to generalize things, obviously we know the trend is, more self-service, more digital, especially for a younger generation. But I think what's important here when it comes to customer experience, even in the future, is we need to really invest more time, more effort in, understanding different segments or different customer archetypes a little bit better. Before I mentioned about values-based consumers, for example, this is a new driving force, but that's not always the case for every single new customer, right? Some customers might not be that values-obsessed customers anyway, and so that customer understanding is really the anchor, the fundamental foundational capability when it comes to customer experience, right? So if we don't keep investing in research, is driving a lot of issues because of that. I think again the service delivery, so the customer experience delivery and customer understanding, they are very much intertwined together, right? So a lot of the understanding actually comes from the content center, right? So yes, servicing customers, but also understanding customers better, right? So that unstructured, unsolicited feedback that we are able to capture and analyze and make sense of and turn into actual action is really, really important moving forward. So less surveys, more insights.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point to build on as well, and to recognize that our customers don't operate within a vacuum. So it's not that we've just got banking customers and all they see is our website or our app.
Absolutely.
And so the aspiration there is, of course, is wherever best practice may lie, is where we need to follow and where we need to observe. So naturally, the principles that are baked into the technology around Apple, for example, we can learn a lot from. Some of the best practices around the digitization of grocery services, for example, and some of the learning and mechanics that sits behind that. So we can learn a lot from best practices wherever they lie, irrespective of the sectors in which we reside.
That's great. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time today. It's been a dynamic discussion, and I'm really pleased that it's been a positive. It's been really positive, and that organisations actually are taking the time to care about their customers and providing them with less friction, faster resolution, and more empathetic interactions, as well as better employee engagement for their frontline service staff. I think we're all consumers and customers in one way or another, and all remember that some of the best customer experiences we've had, but more so remember the worst. So thank you both for providing our audience with great insights and examples of delivering more of these memorable and enjoyable service experiences. Appreciate very much your time, and back to you, Mike.
Denise, and a big thank you to both Riccardo and Glenn for sharing your knowledge and experience today. Really great conversation. I'm sure everyone online found it as interesting and relevant as I did. Multiple things got my interest, but I think I especially like the discussion on trust, and it's really given me kind of something to think about a bit further. To close today's session, everyone will receive a follow-up email with links to some assets. There are some good ones, customer experience research, both locally and globally, other webinars we've done with Forrester and other industry experts, and also some customer presentations. If you have any questions about today's session or about Pega in general, please feel welcome to contact us on these contact details. You can also reach out to me and add me on LinkedIn if you have any questions for me specifically. So finally, I'd like to thank our speakers once again, as well as Trans Tasman and their community for joining. Thank you.